In Canada, if you only have a basic pilot's license, you can fly in like 90% of the airspace in Canada.
Yeah, if you want to go and fly, you have to fly a real estate, right? Mm-hmm. And the weather's good, everything else is good. And so how do you get permission to fly in that circumstance?
The good news for Canadian drone pilots is you only need a basic for uncontrolled airspace if the drone is over 250 grams.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Coastal Drone Podcast. This week we're talking about airspace and how it matters, why it matters, where it matters, and who it matters for when it comes to drone pilots. Let's get into it and let's talk about airspace in Canada and airspace in the USA. Good morning, Finn.
Good morning. What is the same between my keyboard and one of Elon Musk's companies?
Crumbs.
They have something to do with space. Today we're talking about airspace. That was good. That was good, everybody. Type, that was a good intro in the comments.
It's not good when someone has to tell you it's good.
Type, that was a good intro in the comments.
I didn't even hear it, honestly. I didn't even process. As soon as you said Elon Musk, I'm like, well, we're not political here.
Much like Class A airspace, that was very high level.
Oh, okay. You got your cackle in for the morning. Let's just set some context here because we talked about this the other day. Earlier on in the advanced flight review process, like 2019, 2020, there was a lot of emphasis put on airspace categories and recalling every airspace letter and knowing what it is, where it is, like what altitude it starts at. And when I was a new flight reviewer, I definitely kind of harped on it a lot more than was necessary. And you'll come to realize why we don't anymore through this conversation and why the letter is less important as to the taste, smell, feel of airspace that you're in, I guess. Like the type of airspace matters more than the letter. So yeah, let's get back into that.
So in Canada and the United States, airspace is divided into different classes. These classes have different characteristics, different requirements to be in them. And broadly speaking, all airspace classes can be categorized into either controlled or uncontrolled.
Yeah.
Now, not to spoil the entire presentation,
well,
but
I don't.
And then I won't.
It's an A or B scenario, right? So if it's controlled airspace or uncontrolled airspace, there's going to be fundamental differences, but all airspace is going to fall under those two rules.
That's right.
And in Canada, it's basically what Finn's about to say and not really alluding to it more, but drones are either in controlled or uncontrolled airspaces where your regulations change.
That's right.
And it's basically the same for the FAA as well.
Well, in Canada, it's controlled, uncontrolled, and then Class F, because Class F can either be controlled or uncontrolled, but that's being a little bit... That's getting really into it.
That's a real semantics dive. So
it's what it says in the book. But yeah, so controlled or uncontrolled airspace. This is what is going to determine whether your regulatory requirements as a drone pilot in Canada. Let's start off with the easy one. Uncontrolled airspace. Normally, you'll see this as Class G, or you'll be referred to as Class G. Most uncontrolled airspace is Class G.
G, general airspace, general aviation.
Good to go.
Good to go.
In Canada, if you're outside of a major city, I think it's something like over 80% of all airspace in Canada is Class G uncontrolled at the surface.
Yeah, pretty much.
But a lot of that, of course, is in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
But
flying polar bears.
Mm-hmm. But Canada has a lot of uncontrolled airspace. There's a lot of places where you can fly where it is considered uncontrolled.
And the same for the States too.
Yes.
Right. It's probably 80-90%. Right. There's a lot of land out there that's not uninhabited, but uncontrolled because it's just not busy enough.
Yes. And the good news for Canadian drone pilots is you only need a basic for uncontrolled airspace if the drone is over 250 grams.
That's right.
So in Canada, if you only have a basic pilot's license, you can fly in like 90% of the airspace in Canada.
Yeah. So as long as you're more than 5.6 kilometers away from a certified airport or 1.9 kilometers away from a certified heliport, and away from the boundaries of any controlled airspace, you can effectively fly right up to the boundary of that controlled airspace but you have to be out of it.
That's right. If you're looking at some sort of aviation map or aviation chart, an official one like map.navdrone or official ones that we've got in front of us here, if you don't see anything, it is most likely Class G airspace.
Yeah.
If there's no like circle or writing, it is most likely Class G airspace.
Yeah, so most apps now, well, pretty much all charts and maps and everything else, like so this what's on the screen right now is a horizontal view of what Canadian airspace and essentially what American airspace looks like as well. They're both the same. You have this inverted layer cake design that surrounds facilities. The solid green area is Class G. That's essentially the same for both.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got airspace to the ground, and then airspace above that, that is the transitory airspace or high-level VFR airspace, and then high-level IFR airspace. That, you don't see that on maps, right? So most maps are top-down. There are tools out there you can look horizontally, like ForeFlight has an in-flight tool that's kind of cool. But you need to look at a chart and look at the shape of it, the outline color, or the shape of the outline, like the dashes or dots, or there's going to be a letter that will tell you what the type of airspace is. Or in the case of airspace above, you just know that it starts at a certain altitude.
Yeah, that's right. So in Canada, for example, Class B airspace is defined as starting at 12,500 feet above sea level and extends up to 17,999 feet above sea level. And then at 18,000 feet, it becomes Class A airspace. And that's like a blanket over all of Canada. And because it's so high, like there's no terrain that is going to that is going to affect those airspace classes.
Yeah, exactly. So at 18,000 feet, the highest peak in Canada is probably in the tens, not
That's
in the
right.
high teens. So
That's right. So you're well clear of any obstacles when you're in that airspace.
cool.
But for pilots at ground level, the time when you're going to have class or controlled airspace at surface level is near airports, air traffic facilities. Now, this could be small airports or big airports. It doesn't, we've got a number of varying sized airports here in Metro Vancouver. For example, like both YVR and Nanaimo are both controlled.
Mm-hmm.
YVR is Class C.
YVR is Vancouver International.
Vancouver International. And then Nanaimo Airport, CYCD, is Class E, controlled airspace.
Yeah. So what's the main difference for drone pilots?
There is no difference for drone pilots.
Right.
The main difference between those two would be for pilots of fixed wing or rotary wing aircraft.
I want to get to one topic, so I'm not sure where you've placed it or if you even have. So
taking a look at the FAA, you can see looks very, very similar. The major difference actually is that basically like a couple things are shifted around.
Mm-hmm.
In the FAA rule set, you can have a Class B down to the surface, and there are no Class E airports. Class E is only like mid-level airspace.
Yeah, so C and B, like Charlie and Bravo airspace, are functionally the same as Class C in Canada.
That's right.
Right. They're used for different categories of operations. So Class Bravo would be a major international airport like LAX or Denver or Seattle or something like that.
Yes.
In Canada, the equivalent is Class C, which is Vancouver, Toronto, Edmonton.
But also smaller ones like Boundary Bay and Pitt Meadows and Langley and...
Yeah, so in reality, you could have a lighter, like a C and a B could be different. Like a Bravo could be Vancouver, and then they would categorize the rules down, but there's no reason to categorize Abbotsford, which is a smaller international airport, which is Class C, any differently than Vancouver, which is a larger international airport, which is also Class C. There's no difference in the service level that's provided or the aviation laws that matter to anyone, really.
That's right. But so the difference in the States is about classification or like what things are called, but functionally it is a very similar it's very similar for pilots in America. If you are flying in controlled airspace, you need air traffic authorization, which you get through one of the companies that is participating in the Lance C program
for drone pilots. Yeah.
For a pilot in an airplane, you just call with a radio.
There's going to be different levels of service, and Bravos you need more permission sooner, basically, is the main difference between that and a Charlie. So.
Yeah, I've actually never flown in the States, so I wouldn't know.
And then one of the other major differences between Canada and the USA when it comes to airspace categories is we don't have Class F airspace.
In America, there's no Class F airspace. They have something that is equivalent to Class F, but it is called special use airspace. So in Canada, we actually further break down the Class F airspace into advisory, restricted, and danger, and RPAS only Class F zones. So RPAS only restricted zones.
Yeah.
In Canada, these can also be added via the NOTAM system for things like emergencies or forest fires. And if it is a Class F restricted airspace, you need permission from the controlling agency.
Yeah, and that's not necessarily NAV Canada or Transport Canada.
Not necessarily. We'll talk about that in a moment.
Yeah.
For the FAA, they have more. So we've got the 3 categories here in Canada. In the FAA, they've got more than that. They have prohibited, restricted, warning, military operation area, alert areas, controlled firing areas, and national security areas.
Do we have 4? We have 4 now, actually.
Because
you've got CYR, CYD, CYA. And now
RPAS only.
RPAS.
If you count the RPAS only as like its own category, okay. Similarly, for these special use airspaces, a pilot would need to contact the controlling agency.
Yeah.
To get permission into it. Now, the information on how to contact them is available on sectional charts.
Yeah.
Which is the paper maps it's
PDF.
A
bit more brokered through the FAA, right? So, like, if there's a military training area, you can call. Like this is for in-flight stuff. If you were calling flight services, you could say, "Is the MOA active?" And they would say yes or no, which would then mean whether or not that NOTAM is active. Which is the same for Canada.
Yes,
you can call for the CYR over Esquimalt.
Yeah, I'll show in a second here. So this is the SUA website for the states, and this is like North California, Nevada area. These are all of the special use airspaces that are in effect, and you can see down at the bottom they're color coded based on when they're going to be active. So it doesn't look like or it looks like a couple of them are active now, and then some are going to be active within an hour, and then if you see down along the bottom you can see when they're scheduled to be active.
Right.
And then, like, for example, this one is not scheduled, this tiny one is not scheduled to be active in soon. So
it's kind of it's not great that the orange and the red are so similar in color.
It's a little bit tricky, is what I would say about this one. But any pilot that wanted to fly in these areas, they would need to check on a website like this or call flight services and see if they are active.
And what's the web address for this?
I believe it is sua.faa.gov
or something.
Yeah, sua.faa.gov. On the Canadian side here, you get, this is a map.nav drone. You mentioned the one Strait of Georgia near Esquimalt. This is what a CYR would look like on our Canadian maps here. So this is CYR, so R for restricted, number 107. That's just its identification number. And it gives you some information about it. Lower limit is the ground. Upper limit is 1,000 feet above mean sea level. And then it gives you the contact information. So it's the RC, the Royal Canadian Armed Forces Esquimalt Detachment. It would be the contact information.
The main thing to look at is the altitude and the designation. So CONT, right? You mentioned continuous.
That's right.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning.
So it's continuous meaning always on.
Yeah, because there's going to be some CYRs in Canada that have multiple layers to them. Like down in Victoria is a good example.
This one has a multiple layer. It's surface to 1,000 feet continuously.
Right. Yes.
And then 1,000 feet to 13,000 feet via NOTAM.
Yeah. So you can fly over top of it in an airplane, but you can't fly a drone in that area.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you can only fly over top of it in an airplane if it's if that NOTAM is not active. So, one of the exercises that student pilots in Metro Vancouver go through when they're flying for this area is when they call to file their flight plan. You always ask, "Is CYR 107 active today?" Is one of the things that you would always ask.
Call flight services.
That's right.
Yeah.
This is something we mentioned before. This is the RPAS restricted airspace per designated airspace handbook. So the designated airspace handbook is the document containing all designated airspace in Canada.
So it's basically a book full of lat-long coordinates and
contact information.
Contact information, name, number. So you search by number. So like this one's
these ones are actually the RPAS ones don't have numbers.
Interesting.
They're all at the back of the designated airspace handbook.
And is it in the DH labeled as North Fraser Pretrial Center? Or?
It is. So at the back of the designated airspace handbook, there is a section that is RPAS restricted airspace, and then they are listed by region. So this was one of the ones from the Vancouver region.
That's not great. They need a numbering system.
Probably they need a numbering system.
Because I can see this getting numerous, right?
Yes.
And arduous. So
Yes. But you can see lower limit, 0 feet
yeah.
ASL, upper limit 1,000 feet ASL.
Okay, so hold on here. Hold on a second. You're saying 1,000 feet. What type of airspace is this surrounding that?
There's Class C all around this.
All the way, because that's just inside the boundary.
That's just inside the boundary for Pitt Meadows, yeah.
Okay, so I was going to say that 1,000 feet doesn't make any sense to me at all because it's higher than Class G airspace limits, unless you had structures or something else. So why are they establishing that? But this one's not a CYR. It doesn't exist.
Only for drone pilots. It's an RPAS restricted airspace.
Yeah. So this altitude limit
is just for drone pilots. And they probably set it that goofily high so that no one would try anything funny. But the other thing is they say it's 1,000 feet above mean sea level, but the area here, it's like 20 feet above sea level. So like if there's some place in...
That's an MSL though. It's not an AGL.
Yeah, it's in AGL. Or sorry, it's in MSL instead of AGL.
Okay, so we're talking about... Altitudes can be listed on the map in either above ground level or above sea level, or a AMSL or a MSL mean sea level. So we're at basically sea level here. Like the building we're in right now, we're probably at about 200 feet above sea level. So if they say it's to 1,000 feet above mean sea level, that means it's 800 feet above ground, which is still higher than a drone can fly unless authorized in controlled airspace. So can you find, I know it's kind of off, maybe I'll do it while we're talking here, but is there a drone-specific restricted airspace in Class G that goes higher than 400 feet? It's a weird thing to me that they would do that.
Let me pull up map.nav drone, because I know that there are some in Class G.
Yeah, and just for context, so while Finn's doing that, drone laws allow for, so the maximum height a drone can fly in Canada without an SFOC is 400 feet above ground in Class G or uncontrolled airspace. In uncontrolled airspace, you can fly a drone higher than 400 feet above ground as long as it's within 200 feet of a structure. So then you can go up to 100 feet above that structure. The purpose of that is, like, say you're doing tower inspection in the middle of nowhere and it's a 2,000 foot tower you need to climb up. You don't need to get an SFOC for that as long as you stay close to the tower, because no airplane or helicopter should be crazy enough to be that close to that tower at any point. So what's this one you got on the map?
Surrey Pretrial Services Center, 0 to 1,300 feet.
Okay. Is this one on the sectional, on the standard aviation chart? I don't think so. It's not a CYR. And
No.
Is that a current sectional?
Current-ish.
Sorry, this is a little off the rails, but these are relatively new.
Yeah, it's within the last
couple months.
AIM
3 months.
cycle.
Yeah.
It was in the last version of the AIM, which came out in October.
Yeah. So we haven't really talked too much about it because it was kind of a weird overlap of CYRs.
I understood why they were doing it, but it didn't, because it doesn't.
So you're saying Surrey pretrial?
Yes, that's right.
So I'm looking at like King George on the VTA right now. Newton Call Point, I think, is kind of in the area. Yeah.
Yes, it's right beside. It's near like the approaches for Boundary Bay.
Yeah, and we'll put it in the final edit of this. We'll have a screenshot here right now, but you'll see. So there's the Boundary Bay courthouse. So courthouse is basically what we're talking about right now.
Yeah, I guess it would be.
Yeah, there is no change in airspace over the courthouse on the VTA, the VFR terminal area chart.
Yes, it's only for drone pilots.
So I can fly a Cessna at 1,000 feet above the courthouse, but I can't fly a drone at 1,300 feet above the courthouse.
No.
Do you see how this could be problematic from we have to be consistent in how we interpret and apply aviation laws, because there's a lot of conversations out there about how drones are aircraft and aircraft are drones, and this is inconsistent.
Yes, because they are saying that there is a specific type of airspace that a specific type of aircraft cannot fly in.
This is like my slippery slope OCD alarm bells going off is what my problem with this is.
I think it makes sense that there are some areas that
like I'm all for
drones specifically shouldn't be able to fly in.
Yeah, like it makes total sense to have this. What I'm concerned about is the altitudes.
Because this altitude is way higher than any.
It's arbitrary.
It is. I think they just put it really high so that it would not
But
that would prevent people from, because there, if you look in the designated area, so this is where it is in the designated airspace handbook at the back here. You can see they're all like that.
One other thing for context here. So this is talking about future laws stuff, but there is going to be increase in height. Part of the
oh yeah, this might be future proofing for the
So that with the new laws coming, but that increase in height is not for built up areas. It comes back to population density, and I'm looking at the VTA here. It's all yellow over the courthouse call point. What the yellow means, it's an old school thinking of what is considered a built up area, right? So if courthouse call point is a built up area, that's more than 20 people per square kilometer or whatever the threshold is. If Max were in the chat right now, he'd be beaking up on this for sure because he's like the expert on this side of it. But it's a built up area by definition of several resources. So you wouldn't be able to fly a drone in theory without an SFOC up to that height. This is just, it's really messy is what I'm saying right now. This is partly why we haven't talked about it, because
I don't think it's that messy. I don't know what I understand your concerns with the altitude, but to me it doesn't.
I'm just asking questions.
Right. It doesn't come across to me as being particularly egregious.
Okay. All right.
Sorry.
Stay tuned for a half-hour rant from Ian about.
Yeah, sorry to yuck your yum there, but like
Ford Mountain. These are all drone specific ones on the screen.
Yes,
right
these are the drone
surface
specific
to
ones.
2,200 feet. So Ford Mountain's probably at 500 feet ASL, because that's up in the Chilliwack River Valley, I think.
Yeah, and that's in a non-built up area, so that's probably why that is up that high is for the future proofing of the stuff. I honestly
think these are arbitrary. I think people are just like dartboarding these.
Who's to say? I'm not sure which.
1,600 and 3,300. Kamloops Regional. Kamloops is closer to 1,000, maybe higher actually.
Not sure.
I'm just thinking about like the general elevation of the terrain there.
Yeah.
The Nanaimo, 1,300 feet. Yeah, they're at sea level. So I just like, is there a formula that has been applied to this?
Surface to 1,300 feet.
Nuclear power plant, only 1,300 feet. So there's got to be a formula that's being applied. We'll go back to the one that said 1,000 feet. What was that? Up a bit more.
Well, this one is
Moncton. So that's on the water. That's a dockyard.
Yes.
So so it's 1,000 feet above is what they've defined this as.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds.
Tell me if I'm crazy in the chat.
That sounds reasonable, actually, and especially like these ones that are 1,300 feet. Like, if we go back to Nav,
it's allowing for variation.
Yeah. And if we go back to Nav drone,
Surrey's 200 feet above ground. Or above sea level for sure.
Yeah, this part of Panorama Ridge, so it's probably 1,000 feet. You know what? That sounds reasonable to me. I could see why they don't want people flying around these because these prisons, these are not.
That's not a prison though.
It's a
pretrial correctional facility.
Yes.
So it holds prisoners.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it is not a prison.
Yeah.
And anyways,
I'm curious to see what else is going to be included in this list, because now zoom in on that. Okay, so you have to contact the warden. You are at the corner of 56th Avenue and King George doing a real estate shoot. Mm-hmm. How do you get permission to fly in that area now?
You'd have to call that person,
warden.
That warden, yes.
Yeah. So, and you'd be like, I want to fly at this time at this altitude, right? Which is no different. Like one of my first drone jobs that I did was actually flying about 400 feet away from a prison, an actual prison in CYR airspace. And it was that. I just called them, said what I wanted to do. I think I gave them proof of my advanced license. It wasn't required. Like that has nothing to do with it. It's going to be based on the airspace you're in. But that was just some sort of proof of identification, right? Like I have a legitimate reason to be here without exposing my customer. Like you don't really need to share what you're doing for your customer, but you should be prepared to identify yourself, right? You are required to have a pilot certificate available for
a peace officer.
A peace officer, which they're not, but if you annoy them, they're calling the cops. So you need to be prepared for it. So
yes.
Is it because of the proliferation of drones being used to drop narcotics and weapons to inmates? Absolutely.
That would be my assumption.
Yeah. I don't know what the number is, but the incursion count is significant and it happens quite a lot. There's a lot of companies that make very good livings on drone detection and deterrence and interdiction, actually, for preventing these kind of things from happening. But like the technology is always advancing path. It's a cat and mouse game of new drones.
12-foot ladder.
Yeah.
And all that.
Yeah. I watched a really good video last night by Tech Ingredients. It's that crazy scientist dad and his kids that like create rockets and everything. They made a microwave cannon for taking out drones, and it's worth a watch. It's pretty interesting. It cost them like 42 cents to make this thing that fries drones, but doesn't permanently damage them. Very dangerous,
Interesting.
but very cool.
I should get one for flight reviews.
Okay, and flight review is over. Also, your ability to reproduce is over.
Potentially.
Speaking of restricted airspace, so we talked about the drone specific ad nauseum.
Yes.
What else?
So the other one is forest fires.
Yeah, so good old automatic NOTAMs, right?
Yes.
If smoke exists and smoke is not someone's garbage fire in their backyard.
Which it can be hard to tell sometimes.
Yep. I was driving into work this morning actually, and I saw a garbage fire in a park, and it was really sad to see, and hopefully someone deals with it.
There are times where I'll be flying over the farmers' fields out to the east.
Yeah.
And there's like multiple, and you can see the haze layer start to build.
And it's all slash piles.
Yeah, and you can watch like 4 or 5, 6,
So
7.
are slash piles wildfires that you need to avoid?
By my reading of the regulations, I don't think so.
No, because they're in theory controlled and prescribed.
Yes.
If you're in the middle of the forest and you see a burn pile, a slash pile, you should probably avoid it.
Yes.
Even though it might be controlled, you don't know for sure.
Yes, and if the one thing to note is like if you are in the bush and you see smoke or fire and you're within that 5 nautical miles, just land the aircraft and report it, because it's likely that you're actually the first person to.
Yeah, I actually reported several. I was doing a long ferry in a helicopter, and I was coming from Ashcroft back home, and it came through a valley, and it was really hazy, and I come over this ridge, and sure enough, there's like 4 or 5 starts on the other side of the ridge. So I take a bunch of pictures with my iPhone, which also geotags them at the same time, and then marked it on the map. And then as soon as I got back, I called it in, which you could, if you're in an airplane, you can call flight services and also call it in too.
I was just about to say, I actually have called in a forest fire to flight services once.
Yeah. So if no one calls it in, and you see a fire 5 nautical miles or 3,000 feet above, which is impractical for drones anyway. So
That's
effectively, It's 5 nautical miles from the perimeter of the fire. And if you don't know the perimeter, just basically 5 miles from smoke, right? So if you can see the source of the smoke.
Where there's smoke, there is fire, as they say.
Yeah. So, but that is the default rule,
Yes.
right? So NOTAMs are automatically spooled up on that perfect circle radius around the spot. However, once the fire is established or considered a fire of note, there's a couple different ways that it can be prescribed. In across Canada, the guarantee is it's most likely going to end up being a NOTAM in nav drone, which is our only up-to-date official source of NOTAMs that kind of works for drones. Like, it's the best option.
Yes. Besides calling flight services.
There's text-based services for NOTAMs, which it's under the Spaces, the Nav Canada Spaces app, or they call it CFPS, Collaborative Flight Planning Service, or Space.
Yeah, Collaborative Flight Planning Service, or WX Recall.
Yeah, and then there's third-party data interpreted. Every time I mention them, the site gets killed, though.
Yeah,
right?
so don't
I feel
mention
bad
them.
because like it used to be notammap.ca, and that's gone.
Yes.
There's notams.ca now, I think, is a new one.
Don't dox them? Yeah.
Don't make them successful, because then they'll get killed.
Yes.
Yeah, no, let's keep them secret, keep it safe.
But
there are third-party tools like Drone Pilot Canada does have NOTAM, but I think it's parsed a little bit differently. So it's
all we can recommend to you as educators is to look at the official sources.
Yeah, the nav drone, because Nav Canada publishes the NOTAMs. They may get issued by transport, they may get issued by other agencies, but they all get published via Nav drone.
Yes.
Or sorry, Nav Canada.
That's right.
Your flight services provider.
That's right.
So that said, they may not be a perfect circle. They may be a triangle. They may be an octagon.
For example, 2 years ago we had the West Bank fire
Yeah,
up
in Kelowna.
here in West Kelowna.
And it was a big L shape.
And, well, if you actually looked at it on a map, it actually covered almost perfectly. It covered the boundaries of the municipality.
Yes.
So it was even though large parts of the municipality were not at risk of fire or not near firefighting operations, they used the boundaries of the municipality to draw that CYR.
So in that situation, let's say, okay, you're in an area part of municipality of Kelowna, you want to go and fly, you have to fly a real estate, right? Mm-hmm. And the weather's good, everything else is good. There's no smoke.
Not too smoky.
There's no smoke, which is a down, like we've had lots of summers where you're downstream of smoke and it's like, why are you flying? It's not going to be good footage.
Yes.
And so how do you get permission to fly in that circumstance?
You would have to figure out who the controlling agency is and give them a call and ask their ops room if you can get permission to take off.
Yeah.
And if they say, no, sorry, we've got the Chinook coming through.
Yeah.
Then
at 100 feet above your house.
At 100 feet above your house, because we're gonna drop a bunch
your neighbor's house is on fire.
Yep. Yeah. Then you're hooped.
Yeah.
But and we have heard of it before, where if it's a large NOTAM area and you're not right at where the firefighting operation is happening, I have heard of it being approved, but I don't want to guarantee that would ever.
Yeah, good example is I had to do a bunch of flight reviews in Kamloops, and it was during a massive restricted airspace NOTAM. It was like 50 nautical miles radius. Like it basically covered all of the interior of BC with this restricted airspace. Like no GA airplanes could fly.
Yes.
Right? It was a black hole. And where I was a gravel pit mine. So there was zero risk of fire in my specific area. There was zero risk of flyover traffic in my area. So I had to call the radio room for BC Wildfire Service, let them know where I was, let them know what I was going to do, let them know what altitude I was going to be to. And I'm like, look, this is no risk to you guys. But I need an email approving that this operation can take place. Otherwise, I'm busting the CYR. Right. So that's all you need is some sort of
written communication. It's CYA for the CYR. So cover your butt. There's Ian's cackle of the day. Not much of a cackle.
Yeah.
So
and they're not difficult. But don't call Nav Canada talking about a NOTAM unless you cannot find any kind of published information about it.
That's right.
Because it confuses and frustrates. And I've been guilty of this myself. 2021 during the floods, I had a bunch of people calling, wanting to go and do facilities inspections in the Fraser Valley because like they wanted to know, was my power lines up? It was some utilities that wanted some emergency, and I was stuck on the east side of the flood. So I'm like, it's great, I can help you guys out, but I need to get permission to fly. Period. Right? Because it's all busted, and it wasn't clear what agency had put up the NOTAM that was blocking the airspace, because it was like from surface to 1,000 feet because of all the airplanes and helicopters and everything else.
Yeah, I remember that because I was doing flight training at the time, and our flight school put out a memo that said, even though it's surface to 1,000, we want you to avoid the flooded area.
Don't fly over it, because if you have an engine failure, now you're entering a CYR for one thing.
Yeah,
and also
and you're gonna do a forced approach to a flooded field that potentially has 6 feet of water on it.
You're now a boat, but it turned out, because originally it was supposed to be Abbotsford Police, and then the RCMP took over, and then I think the military took over at some point, or RCMP like National Division took over. But there was way too many layers. I wasn't able to get a hold of someone that could grant me permission in a timely manner. So the clients that had called me, I lost out on the work because they sent someone in a truck. They figured out a way to get a truck there anyway instead.
Yeah.
So,
or the person that you did call could grant you permission and just said, I can't do that.
Yeah.
Call someone else.
Yeah. Or they didn't want the liability because they didn't understand what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Kind of, I think the takeaway for drone pilots here is there are 3 broad categories of airspace in Canada and the U.S.
Yeah.
Controlled, uncontrolled, and
restricted.
Or special use.
Yeah.
And in Canada, for a special use restricted, you need to get permission. In the States, for a special use, you need to get permission.
Yeah. For
controlled airspace, you need to get permission to fly. And that is done via the LANC in the States and through portal.navdrone.ca in Canada.
Yeah. So if you go to the FAA Drone Zone website, that's the best place to start for figuring out what land sea provider you can use to facilitate your controlled airspace.
There's a bunch of them. Some of them are free. Some of them are paid.
Yeah.
Our FAA course has a tutorial of me using one of the free ones to plan and execute a mission.
Yeah, and they do change. They come and go. So
Yes.
it's better to just start with the FAA drone zone so that this information is relevant and
Drone
now
zone.
and into the future.
Drone zone.
As far as I'm aware in Canada, I don't see anything on the horizon for anything other than nav drone for getting controlled airspace permission.
Yeah, I would imagine that it is going to be because, to be honest, I actually think it's quite a good system. I know
It's
that
gotten better over the years for sure. There were some growing pains. It definitely had some early issues, but it is a lot better than the email phone tag chain that you had to do in the past.
Yes.
And speak specifically to some sentry officer
yeah.
somewhere.
Sometimes for NavDrone you have to wait a little bit, but the actual planning the mission and submitting it is a fairly straightforward process.
And we've got a video coming out soon talking about some challenges we faced with nav drone in a controlled airspace environment. So stay tuned for that one.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that,
Airspace. Watch the space.
stay tuned to this space for more air.
3S space.
That's it.
That's it.
That's it.
Airspace. Have a good rest of your day and happy flying.
Yep. Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you find this content valuable, please let us know. If you find this content a complete waste of time, also please let us know. We love hearing your comments and feedback either way. We've got lots of other episodes. We've got a full year of podcasts on our YouTube channel that you can check out, not to mention other video topics about how to make money using drones, how to become a certified drone pilot in both Canada and USA. And of course, we do weekly drone news where you can find out the latest leaks from DJI because that thing's got more holes than the Titanic. So anyway, thanks for watching. We'll talk to you guys soon.
Cheers.
Bye.